going on, golf fans? It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and prop stream for round 4 of the AMEX. Gonna get you ready for all of your exposure on Sunday. But first off, we'll look at the weather report, and then a look at DFS and props afterwards. But any questions, any deep dives that you guys have for me in the chat, feel free to go ahead and let me know. But we're having ourselves a Saturday. It's been a solid week so far. Profit on our props and betting for 2 of the 3 days. Over 5 units of profit there. And for the year, just under 10 units of profit. And we're only 2 weeks into the season. So a great start there. Hoping to build on that for Sunday. And of course, from the DFS side of things, ended up being a really good one for Showdown as well. Because yesterday we talked about there being a potential edge for La Quinta Country Club, with it being a bit more protected by the wind. And that's exactly what ended up happening. So more on that in just a minute. But we got the Jonestown twins in chat. Welcome on in, man. I'll touch on that question a little bit later on. But we got Alan down there as well, the back-to-back champion heading into round 3. Looks like you didn't have as much luck today, but like you said, we've got round 4 to get back after it. So you got to start another streak for tomorrow. We got Jose in the chat. It says, by the way, Echeverria scoring a 9 on the par 3 was beyond insane. Yeah, he was in ejection mode, man. I think he made like a double the hole before that on a par 5. And there were a few guys that did that today. It was round 3 of a pro. You could tell they didn't want to be there, but we want to be here, right? Heading into Sunday with all of you guys in the chat. And let's get after it for tomorrow. We got Zach Jeffers there. You got a crazy bomb outright on Hoagie Live. That is a crazy bomb outright, especially with the kind of odds you could have got on him. He said no hedge potential, but it's going to be fun. And yeah, same thing here. I've got McCarty towards the top, some DFS lineups that are in good shape for Sunday. So no hedge opportunities or anything, but we're certainly going to have a fun sweat at it. So hopefully a lot of you guys in chat can say the same thing. If not, you can make round 4 Showdown your sweat for tomorrow. So we'll touch on all of that here. But we got James in the chat, the man, the myth, the legend. Thanks for the great start. I appreciate that, James. What's going on, Jay, the football nerd, too? We also got Steven Litowitz in the chat as well. And I probably butchered your last name, but I'm sorry about that. And yeah, good evening to all of you sweaty tryhards. And for the first time in a long time, I haven't taken my first sip of this yet. We've got some whiskey and Coke in the cup. Somebody yesterday said, hey, maybe that help out with my headaches and whatnot. Headache's actually already gone, but let's celebrate with a little bit of a drink this time. And I'll cheers to you guys on that one, and then we'll start talking some golf for tomorrow. Way too strong, but I'd rather it be too strong than too weak. But let's go through the averages from today. And I promised you guys, or at least I talked about the chance of there being an edge towards La Quinta Country Club. And if you take a look at the averages, it was the easiest of the 3 tracks. So because I was going a little bit harder towards that side, especially with my leverage plays, I ended up going quite well for Showdown. So it was about 0.38 shots easier than the Nicholas Tournament course. But just like days 1 and 2, the stadium course was by far the hardest of the 3. But now that we're going to Sunday, we're only going to have the 1 course in play. So all this course narrative BS that we talked about the last few days is not going to be in play for Sunday. In fact, it's just going to be a traditional Showdown slate on the 1 golf course. It is threesomes off of holes 1 and 10. So that's the one wrinkle with the relatively large cut, 73 players that are going to be playing on Sunday. But outside of that, it is pretty run of the mill from that perspective. I guess one other thing that we'll throw out there is that the scoring is perhaps going to get a little bit easier for tomorrow, because the weather, unlike the wind that they played in the afternoon, looks a lot calmer for tomorrow. So it's going to be windy till about 9 and maybe 10 a.m. local time. So the first hour and a half of play could be a little bit gustier than what the rest of the day is being played in. But you're talking about sub 3 miles an hour of sustained winds and next to no wind gusts for the entire day. So even though the Sunday pin locations will likely be a little bit tighter than the first 3 rounds, that's what you always see at this event with the Pro-Am for the first 3 days, it's still likely going to improve from the scoring perspective. So we're going to talk a lot about that with the prop side later, but it is important to note from the DFS angle that placement points are going to matter, but they aren't going to be the end all be all. If you're somebody that's going off earlier and is capable of shooting something like -5, -6, that is almost a shoe-in to get to the optimal lineup. So I think you want to prioritize the placement points in particular, because some of the guys going off later actually are going to have the best conditions out of anybody. But because the scoring is still going to be there and it won't be major championship type conditions, if you have a few early starters, mid players in the leaderboard that are going to be in that 3 to 5% range or even lower for the ownership, don't be shy about mixing them into lineups either. So not a big weather edge, not a big horse edge like we had for the last few days, but still something to incorporate into our process, because if we had seen really nasty weather here, it's 10 to 15 mile an hour winds like what we had this afternoon, where the course only played about even par, actually a little bit over par at times this afternoon, then placement points would be a lot more impactful. We wouldn't want to take as many early starters, at most maybe 1-2 in a lineup. Whereas with this sort of open scoring, like what we have for tomorrow, if you have 3 early/mid starters that you really like, or I should say towards the middle to the bottom end of the leaderboard that you really like, then that's totally acceptable with this sort of a setup. So next thing we're going to go through would be ownership, which is always the second biggest or the biggest edge that we have for Showdown. And for tomorrow, especially with the Sunday Showdown slate, it's something that we've got to keep in mind, but is almost unavoidable when we have those placement points in play. And I will say that of these top 10 in the ownership, that's exactly what we have on here. And I'm playing a vast majority of these players that you're seeing. It's just that when you're using these guys that are getting the extra steam, that you have to at least compensate for it at some point. And if you're in a large field GPP and you find yourself playing 3 or 4 of these players together, then you better be leaving some salary on the table in that lineup, or potentially going and trying to get to like 2 or 3 sub-5 percenters to offset some of that chalk that you're taking. So more on that later. We're going to go through some lineup construction, but let's start off who the top 10 highest owned players are. This, by the way, is taken from my Patreon page. This is the golf showdown sheet for round number 4. Golf DFS tier is how you guys get access to this. And it's just cut off with the top 10 in the ownership. So obviously there's a lot more projections on here. My player pool's blacked out and whatnot. But what we're going to focus on is what I have highlighted right here. And the top owned player is a Siwoo Kim at 36.8%, which is actually higher owned than Scotty Scheffler, which might surprise some people, even though he's in the lead. The reason for that is the salary component. He's $9,800, much easier to fit into your lineups. If you use the Scotty Scheffler, it almost forces you to go down to the 7K range, bottom into the 8K range at best for your second man in, which is a tough spot to live in from your lineup construction. So that's why for me, guys like a Siwoo Kim are still usable in that sort of circumstance. But Scotty Scheffler and spending up for him at just 30% is also maybe a little bit more attractive. So those are the top 2 highest owned players. Other guys close to a couple shots off the leader also getting steam, like a Wyndham Clark and an Eric Cole. Wyndham Clark is the chalk in the 8K range, and Eric Cole at only $7,100 will probably be 30% to even 40% owned in some single entries because of how affordable he is at $7,100. And he's only at about 24.4% in these large field GPP projections, because people do spread out their ownership a bit. Large field GPPs, you have to take stands against the rest of the field, and people do so with their lineups. So guys like him maybe won't get as much attention as they will in the cash lineups or in the higher dollar single entries, like I was saying. But Eric Cole, guys like a JT Poston, the Ryan Gerards in the 7K range, and McCarty, a Tom Hoagie down here as well, give you enough flexibility to use guys like a Scotty Scheffler. And the main thing that you really want to avoid, I would say, would be like using a Scotty and then only using these 7K guys with him, going with, the guy in second place, these other guys starting in the top 5, top 10 that are going to be in that 15 to 20% ownership range. Single entry is probably going to be 25 to 30% owned in a lot of cases in that 7K range. You have a lineup with 1 30%er and then 2 to 3 other guys that are 20 to 25% owned. You've got no chance of making a non-duplicated lineup at that point. Even if you leave some salary on the table, even if you go to somebody that's maybe sub 5% as your last man in, you're going to have a 50-50 coin flip at best on whether you're going to have duplication of like 5 to 10 times out there. So that's why that sort of lineup construction is one that I'm personally not going to be on. If I'm getting to a Scotty Scheffler who's the 30% ownership, maybe I see myself playing like one of these guys that's the chalk in that 7K range, but I'm going to be trying to get a lot of my differentiation in my 1 to 2 sub 10 percenters, likely in that 7K range. So I think that's where, if you're going to avoid some of this chalk, it's the best place to do so. Not so much when it's guys like a Siwoo Kim, a Scotty Scheffler, even a Wyndham Clark, who's a quality player, major champion at this stage of his career at just $8,000. I more so worry about some of the guys that aren't as strong of players. And then you can see a Ben Griffin's down here at $10,900, which this 15.5% mark for the number 10 in ownership is a lot lower than you'd expect on a Ben Griffin at 10 grand. Normally Griffin, especially like today, he was 25 to 35% owned in GPPs. that's dropping because of the reliance on guys like Scotty and Asiwu Kim. And if they're going to be over 65% combined owns between those two players, then that's got to come from elsewhere. And that means that guys like a Ben Griffin, a Robert McIntyre, a Patrick Cantlay towards the top end of the pricing are getting squeezed a bit and are all sub 15% owned. In fact, some of them are close to 10% ownership, which in rounds 1 through 3, unless they were playing the stadium course, was just not going to happen for a lot of those players. So there's an opportunity, if you don't think a Scotty Scheffler goes out there and wins this thing, to get some differentiation towards the top. But even if he does win, I want to throw this out there because I like Scotty. I am playing him for tomorrow, but I'm not using him in all my lineups. That's, I guess, the key thing to throw out there. It's probably going to be a 50-50 split on lineups that have Scotty versus lineups that don't have Scotty for me. But the reason why Scotty Scheffler, even if he wins this thing, might not be optimal is that we've got a bunch of guys in that top 5, top 10. And because scoring is going to be good enough where winning alone isn't going to be enough to necessarily be optimal. Now, for everyone else but Scotty, if you're winning this event, I mean, the guys at the top, there's a good amount of them from -20 or better. Somebody's going to shoot like -6 tomorrow because the conditions are so good. That player, if it's not Scotty, is almost guaranteed to make it to the optimal lineup. But Scotty's not necessarily guaranteed to get there if you have guys like Siwoo that finishes in second and puts up a respectable score. He's so much cheaper that maybe a Ben Griffin shoots a -7 and gets to the optimal lineup, or a Cantlay who's got the great course history around here. Maybe he shoots a nuclear round at that stadium course. If you've got two of these 9K guys that you absolutely have to have that end up finishing like top 3, top 4, and post a similar score to a Scotty Scheffler, that combination has a pretty decent chance, because just remember the difference from first to second is a little bit over a birdie from first to second in your showdown scoring. If these guys like Ben Griffin, a Cantlay, are shooting -7, -8, and Scheffler wins with like a -5, you might have to have those guys that are shooting -7 to -8 instead. So I don't think it's a slate where like you can just like lock Scotty Scheffler. The price tag is the main reason for that, and it's also why he's only about 30% owned there. So the lineup construction matters with who you're using, and I would say I do like the Scotty lineups, but the lineups without Scotty are a lot easier to build. And I do like that component as well. Then the next thing we're going to focus on, guys, would be building a player pool. We're also going to go through some shots gained metrics. So if you guys have any players you guys want me to deep dive, feel free to let me know now in the live chat. We'll go through any questions that you've got. We'll also go through the shots gained metrics if we have them for round number 3. But in terms of what I'm looking for in my player pool, the first thing I'm going to note is actually this bottom tag, which is the placement point tag. That has a lot to do with these guys at the top end of the board. So this top 10 in the ownership, you know, I said a lot of those guys are in my player pool. Almost all of them, I think, except for like 1, maybe 2 of them are placement point guys that I'm only using because of their starting position. And usually this only shows up on Sunday, right? Because the placement points aren't in play for rounds 1 through 3. And that's why we're playing a little bit more chalk than usual there. But it's necessary. It's a necessary evil for round 4 showdown to get to some of those higher owned players if you want any chance of taking down the large field contest. But like we had in rounds 1 through 3, I have a other type of process to get to the rest of my plays. And it's going to be the exact same that we've done so far, because it's, you know, treated us extremely well this week. We've done very well using these tags. We're going to look at the shots gained metrics for round 3 at the stadium course. Only a third of the field was there today, so we're quite limited on the players that we have these from. But a lot of your top tier players were playing the stadium course today, so that is good to have. And we're going to look at high upside players, course history like we have all week. Also, some of the better putters on this POA overseed surface, so that we're just not picking names out of a hat. And with round 4 showdown, with rounds 2 and 3 showdown like we've had so far this week, part of the reason why this community and us in general on this live stream have so much success in the showdown streets is that we're just not throwing guys in there for any rhyme and reason, right? We're not doing it for some bullshit reason like, oh, they're just low owned. There are plenty of low-owned players that we have on this kind of a slate. So having data points to go out there and actually pinpoint to build your player pool is going to be massive for your long-term results. And if you're a part of my Patreon page and you guys have access to the Golf DFS tier, which is how you download the sheet completely uncensored, every single player that I have this in my player pool tab has that tag along with it. So it's not just who I'm playing, but also why I'm playing them, so that you can vet it. You can figure out whether it's something that you want to go out there and tail yourself, and also so that you can learn to become a better DFS player and learn where to find some value compared to their ownership. So really good learning tool, a really good tool for cleaning up your process. Even if you're not a part of my Patreon page, you're just looking to actively improve what you're doing with PGA DFS. When you're building your player pool, it's a really good exercise to go through it and do it by hand, kind of like I do on this spreadsheet here. but jot down your reasons for it too. That way you can correlate lineups if you need to. If you want to build ball striking lineups, you can. Maybe there's a course that's really off the tee heavy where driving distance is useful. Then, that's the kind of thing that you could take like 5 or 6 guys that have the off the tee tag. You name it. You go to a putting contest and look for all the good POA overseeded putters. Those are things that you can't do if you're not putting down your rhyme and reason for playing these players. So it'll clean it up. It'll let you take that correlation if you want to go that department. And something that's really helped me out over the last year or so in DFS. Next up, let's go through the shots gained metrics and any of the deep dives that you guys have for me in the chat. But before we open up to questions and deep dives, I do want to look at these round 3 numbers. And just like the first couple days, the people that were hitting the ball the best today have the best chance to back that up tomorrow. And Haotong Li had a nuclear round in round number 3. Love to see it as somebody that had plenty of exposure there, but not in Showdown, but for DFS in general this week. I was big on Haotong. He played the stadium course, so you didn't want him in Showdown for round number 3, but he did gain 5.3 strokes ball striking, 2.5 putting. Might be a little bit hard to back up, but nobody was hitting the ball better than Haotong Li. But you give a boost to guys like Russell Henley here, Johnny Kiefer at number 3. Sepp Straka unfortunately missed the cut, but he did post at least somewhat respectable performance for his last time out this week. But guys like Sam Burns, Max McGreevy, and Alex Smalley are all players that you should be slightly bumping up in your process. And of this top 5 to 7 players that we just went through there, I believe there's 4 of them that I've thrown into my round 4 process. And some of them are towards the top 25, like Haotong's T10. You have a top 20 on a Henley. He's getting a little bit of ownership towards the top end of the board. Kiefer at T24, same thing. Like he's averagely owned compared to some of the other players around them. But average ownership on guys that are projecting some of the best for round 4 are going to be players that are hard for me to avoid in most cases. So you also want to look at some of the short game players. The guys that gained a whole bunch of putting, it could be a little bit of a red flag heading into Sunday. So guys like a Zach Johnson, Alex Smalley, Haotong. Haotong did hit the ball well. Same thing with Alex Smalley, but they got a whole lot out of the short games. This isn't really going to help these sort of players. And it's not like any of these guys are automatic fades. Like Haotong, I think, is still perfectly playable. Same thing with the Smalley, with how he hit the ball today. But if we go to the guys that lost a whole bunch in these couple categories, for the ones that made the cut at the very least, if they hit the ball respectively and they're even just a neutral, but they're around the green in the putting. By the way, I mean, we mentioned it with the ball striking, but the off the tee and approach, that's what constitutes shots gained ball striking. That's the more consistent part of golf from day to day. The around the green in the putting is the more inconsistent part. You can hit perfect putts and sometimes just not get anything to drop. You can hit terrible putts and then end up making them when you're not expecting it. That's why guys like a Keith Mitchell, that you can see over here, gained 1.58 shots gained ball striking today, but lost over 2 strokes in the short game, are guys that I'm giving a little bit of grace to, and especially at next to no ownership. You can see Keith Mitchell at T50 has no placement point potential, but because the scoring is going to be half decent, I know it's tough spins, but -1 to -2 scoring average is what I'm expecting. Pretty wide range there because it does depend on the kind of pin setup that we're going to get, and those haven't released yet, or at least didn't release before we got the live stream here. Guys like Keith Mitchell are going to be essentially no ownership, and if they just nuke for a -6, -7 round, it might not matter where they end up on the leaderboard when it's all said and done. So SH Kim, he didn't hit the ball that well, but probably putts better the next day. But players like a Max McGreevy here that gained 2.3 strokes ball striking, they can see lost about a stroke in the short game categories, maybe are a little bit better in those 2 categories tomorrow. So not a ton of short game regression candidates, to be honest, that we have on this list. Maybe like you can see a lot of them miss the cut. I guess that's the main reasoning for that. Also, only a third of the field have the shots gained metric. So to bring up the leaderboard and to go back to the top end of this, because a lot of this top 5, top 10, and top 20 weren't even playing the stadium course today, you better have a more well-rounded process than just looking at the round 3 stats, whether that's greens regulation, true approach, a bunch of the different stuff that you can find around the industry. The round 3 stats are only going to get you so far. That's why having things like course history, the POA putting, the high upside players that I was showing you guys before is so important for this kind of a showdown slate. And I think that's why we've had so much success this week, because we've had that well-rounded process, and a lot of people out there without the shots gained metrics haven't had their usual data, and I guess it showed with some of their results. So over here on the right, that's the POA overseed category. That's this K category that I'm covering right now. That is available for all my Patreon members. Course history, that's this event history tab towards the bottom. I've got that at the AMEX for the last 5 years. You can use that to find some of those plays. And then on Bet the Number, this is something that I've showed the last couple of days, and it's especially valuable this time of year. But if we go on to Bet the Number, we click on the round props tab over here, and then we sort this by, I think the last 36 rounds is probably the best way to go about it. we can see who's making the most birdies lately and who some of the high upside players in this field would be. And it's going to take it a second to load, so we'll give it a second to load up some of those leaders. But if you go to birdie or better average, Scotty, Roger, Sadier, Meissner, Cole, we went over this list the day before, but the top 10 to top 20 on this list, if they made it through the cut line, perhaps worth a look at some of your round 4 showdown lineups. And especially if they're like some of the, middle to the bottom end of the leaderboard guys that you're going to be getting at next to no ownership. If you're trying to take somebody for that nuke round on Sunday in the slightly calmer conditions, then this would be a really good list to go through to try and find some of those players. But let's get back to the shots gained metrics. I do want to see if there's any deep dives that you guys have for me in the chat. After this, we are going to build a lineup together and go ahead and put it all together, kind of tie everything for DFS into a knot. And then afterwards, we're going to go through prize picks and underdog. So conditions, we're going to talk averages, and the boards weren't posted before we got on here. So we're going to have to try and find some value to enter together. And hopefully by the time we get to that section, we have some boards to go through, because as of right now, it didn't look like we had those. But let's catch up on chat, see what's going on. And I haven't taken a sip of this drink since the beginning of the stream, so we've got to get working on that. We're slacking from that department. I got you. Yeah, sorry for butchering your name. Whiskey and Coke elite combo. Yeah, I actually tried drinking just the whiskey straight before we got on here, and it was like repulsive in my system because I haven't drinking since the holidays. It's not like that's a long period of time or anything, but even before that, I hadn't drinking in like 2 to 3 months. It's just something that I don't do that much anymore. I don't frankly enjoy it very much. I do it from time to time. Every once in a while, it's kind of fun to do, but yeah. The whiskey and Coke was a necessity this time because it was repulsive when I didn't have it, any sort of a mixer in there. How would I rate out Russell Henley's profile in 1 to 10? So let's take a look at it together. So he's somebody that I think for round 4 makes a lot of sense. He started hot today, then he fell off on his back 9. But if you take a look at the shots gained metrics, because he was at the stadium course, gained off the tee, gained a bunch on approach. That's the most important category, by the way. Off the tee gains are good to see, but approach gains are really where it's at. And then he lost in the 2 short game categories. This is a 9 out of 10 stat profile. And it's part of the reason that I'm on him for tomorrow is he's one of the best ball striking profiles in the entire field. But also, if you take a look at the short game categories, could be due for a little bit of regression there as well. So I like the course fit. He really fits those positional accuracy off the tee sort of tracks. And I was looking at a lot of power this week. Par 5 scoring, birdie or better percentage because of the Nicklaus course in La Quinta. But now that we're on Sunday, this is like TPC Southwind. This is like TPC Sawgrass courses that have a whole bunch of water. It's about hitting fairways and then hitting a lot of clubs from 150 yards and in. That is the Russell Henley blueprint. That is exactly what we want, the courses that we want him at. So he's a 9 out of 10 shots gained profile, a 10 out of 10 course fit. Honestly, now that I think about it, man, if I had to pick just my favorite play, regardless of price tag, so, the elite tier players are going to be at the top end of the heap on this one, it's probably him. Scotty Scheffler, I guess, would be the cop-out answer on that. But, like, if we say anyone but Scotty, it's Russell Henley for me. He's the next best course fit, the next best player in this field. And I don't think at least in my ownership projections, you didn't see him in that top 10. I've got him getting a little bit overlooked at the top. I've got guys like Cantlay, Ben Griffin, a little bit higher owned. I believe their score is 1 to 2 shots better. So that's the main reason for that. McIntyre too. McIntyre is pretty overlooked at that top end of the board, but I like the ownership on him too. So that's part of the reason why he's probably my favorite play that we have on the slate. Can I deep dive some Clark and Putnam? I absolutely can. So let's look at Wyndham Clark first. Wyndham, a proven winner. He's one of the higher pedigree players that we have in this field. Did not have the shots gained metrics from round number 3. I will say, though, that him hitting 88% of his greens regulation is a really good sign. So even though we don't have the full deep dive available, you'd have to imagine that he's gaining strokes on approach if he was able to do that. And, of course, with the kind of score that he posted in round 3. He posted a 66 at the stadium course, which is the hardest of the bunch, and played the hardest that it will the entire week today. Normally, Wyndham Clark can be a putting first sort of player. We nitpick his shots gained profile as being a little bit short game dependent at times. This doesn't look like a short game dependent kind of stat profile. And in fact, when he played the stadium course, he had a very balanced shots gained profile. He did gain in the short game categories, but it wasn't like he was completely carrying himself there. And if we go to round number 1, he hit all but 1 fairway. That's nuts. He never does that. That is incredibly impressive for Wyndham Clark. And he hit almost all of his greens too. I believe that means he missed 2 of them. Yeah, Wyndham Clark, even though we don't have the metrics from today, I'd have to give him a 7 out of 10 with what we've seen here and from the kind of evidence that we have to work on from today. he's a good course fit too. And you normally wouldn't think that at these like positional kind of like water-based courses that he'd play well, but he's played well this week. He's played extremely well at the Players Championship the last couple times out. When you start to get like a 2 or 3 event pop sample size, like what we've had here, it's hard for me to ignore that sort of thing. And then the other player you wanted was an Andrew Putnam deep dive, which we can also go through. Let's look at that. So I went back to Putnam and he played well today. So I was rewarded for that faith in him. But he's sitting at T6, so the chalk's going to be there. If he wasn't in that top 10 in the ownership, he was just outside of that. Somebody that's going to be close to 15% owned, maybe just a little bit below 15% owned in some contests. We don't have the shots gained metrics to work on either. 72% green regulation rate was about field average. So unlike Wyndham, that was well above average. We can't really glean that much from that. The fairway percentage was solid, but he's a short player off the tee to begin with. So at least the round 3 stats, I don't think we can really learn all that much from it. He did play his round at the stadium course in round 1. So this is unfortunately way back on Thursday. On that day, he gained off the tee, lost an approach, and then lost with the short game. I'm going to give him a 5.5 out of 10 just because he's at the top end of the board. I mean, we know he's playing well. Actually, I'll give him a 6 out of 10 because he's sitting there at T6. But we don't really know how he's doing it based on these metrics that we're looking at. He did hit all of his greens in round 2, so I guess that's really notable. So yeah, the 6.5 out of 10 ranking I think is fair on him. But unfortunately, the shots gained metric round was back in the first round, so it's a little bit too far back for that. How about some love for Max Homa maybe? Let's take a look at the stats. He played Stadium today, didn't he? Or no, he didn't. He must have played that earlier this week. Today, he did hit 9.2% of his fairways. I don't think that's right. At least I hope that's not right. Does it mean he hit one of his fairways? Why does that say 5.4 now? So obviously Max Homa's stats are a little bit throwing off here towards the right. But if we go to his shots gained round, okay, what's going on? He did not gain 9.1 on approach and then 9.1 putting. Oh, I clicked VTN scores. That's my apologies. I didn't even know that was a functionality. So that's why we're having those issues there. He hit a bunch of fairways today. He also hit 72% of his greens, which is the PGA Tour average for this round. So about 6 out of 10 stat profile today. If we go to round number 1, you can see that he gained with his ball striking, mostly on approach. So like I said, most important category. So that's a really good green flag to see on a player. I could see some Max Homa here, man. He's at T37, so let's talk about the placement point potential. That is really lacking on a Max Homa, but because the scoring's there, I think he's still usable in the 1 to 2 spots that you're looking for some leverage. But make sure that the rest of your lineup around a Max Homa has some top 5 and top 10 potential, because Max Homa is more than likely at best going to sneak a top 10 in there, probably not the top 5, which might be okay. That might even be enough for a quote unquote placement point player if he ends up cracking that top 10. But yeah, he's not your traditional guy that you're using starting in the top 25. So keep that in mind if you end up using him yourself. Let's build a lineup together and show you what that kind of looks like. And the main thing that we're concerned about for round 4 is having the good balance between enough placement points and not taking enough chalk. And it's most interesting in the large field GPPs, the large field 150 max sort of contest. So that's what we're going to focus on here from this standpoint. We're going to build this for like the large $25 or the large $5 for tomorrow, where you have to have leverage. But here's the kicker with those large field GPPs. You need the leverage, but you also need to have the absolute nuts. That's what makes it so difficult. Sorry about that loud sound. To take down the contest on Sunday is because you have to get difference in spots, but you also have to be sharing some of your plays with the field. So what I like to do with this kind of lineup construction is start with my placement points and then kind of take my leverage afterwards. You can even do it backwards if you want to. If you want to go the opposite direction, sometimes it's easier just to have the leverage done ahead of time. But for me, it's easier to do it in this fashion where we're getting our top 5 knocked out with our first 3, maybe 4 plays, and then using our last 2 to 3 spots to get that leverage. So I'm going to throw in a Siwoo Kim here. I did mention the kind of opportunity cost when using a shuffler just because of that price tag. I do slightly prefer the lineups without them. I'm still using Scheffler in like half my builds. So just a disclaimer on that. But I do like the builds without them maybe just a little bit more. Maybe I should go 60-40 on that. I haven't built my lineups yet, so I still have some creativity and freedom with that. But probably close to 50-50 is what I'm looking at with my builds. But let's go with the Siwoo Kim. Let's go with the Wyndham Clark there as our second/third man in. It's a second/third because we might take like another 8K guy in this sort of a lineup. And we're at $8,000 remaining. So we're certainly going to have at least one more 8K guy in this sort of a lineup on there. But let's throw in rather than going with another top 10 finisher, we've got a Siwu and a Wyndham Clark who both have to finish top 3 for us to have any chance of them being optimal. But now let's go down to this like T15 to T20 range, because we're building this for the large field GPP. We're not building this for a contest with 100 to 1,000 entries. We're building this to take down the biggest contest that we have for round 4 Showdown. So we really want to make sure we're not going to duplicate ourselves a million different times. And by going down from rather than the top 5, top 10 to this top 10 to top 20, the ownership's still going to kind of be there, but it's half the ownership in some cases compared to the guys at the very top end. Those ticking time bombs like an Eric Cole, Blades Brown, a Tom Hoge, and Andrew Putnam that are starting in the top 10 to begin with are exponentially higher owned than some of these sneakier plays down here like a Ryan Gerard. In fact, Ryan Gerard, I do have getting some steam because people love playing the ball strikers. And Gerard's ball striking form heading in is excellent. It's been excellent this week from what we could tell with his shots gained metrics and the green and regulation stats the last couple days. However, he's slightly lower owned than those guys that are starting at T6 or better. And in my opinion, he's just like by and far a better projecting play than what you have with those players. So why not take him there? He still has that placement point potential, still checking that box for us. And we probably want at least one more placement point guy in here. But I'm also going to scroll down here and maybe even look at these guys at T24 so that we're not taking players that are 15 to 20% owned. So for example, we have the salary to make this work. So we're going to go with a Robert McIntyre, but McIntyre being criminally overlooked at the top end of the board. You could go to a Cantlay, you could go to a Ben Griffin if you want to, but if you really want to force in some lower ownership, going to somebody at like T24 as opposed to T16 or T20, like we were looking at there, is just going to help you eke out an extra 3 to maybe 5% ownership leverage and differentiate some of that chalk that we've already taken. So we've got 4 guys that have legit chance to finish top 10. 3 of them have a legit chance to finish top 5. And now with our last 2 spots, we're worrying about our differentiation here. So we're looking for guys that are probably starting outside the top 30 in most cases. So let's throw in a Rasmus Højgaard, and then let's potentially even explore leaving some salary on the table. So let's go down to $6,900, and then it'd say, a Blades Brown would probably be too chalky to take in this scenario. But if you're looking at like a Woodland, a Kuchar, these guys that are starting outside the top 30, like a Tom Kim, a Max McGreevy, by the way, short game regression candidate that we're showing with those shots gained metrics, you leave $400 on the table and you take somebody that's starting outside the top 30. You've got him, another guy starting out the top 30, and a Rasmus Højgaard, and that's enough leverage for the large field GPPs. And I would say if you rounded this off with McGreevy, I'd feel pretty good about it because you not only have those 2 leverage pieces, but also you're leaving that $400 on the table, and that's really going to help you out with that duplication risk. But if you want to be extra sure about it, then only take 3 guys towards the top. And with the scoring being pretty decent, I think this is something that you can do. So there's not a bunch of leverage guys towards the top. So actually McIntyre would be one of those leverage players, but maybe rather than a Ryan Gerard, maybe this would be a better example of it. Maybe you say Denny McCarthy is just a better player than Ryan Gerard, which is true. Denny McCarthy has the better shots gained baseline and better career track record between those 2 players. You want to use a Denny McCarthy instead, and then now you have a little bit more flexibility with your last man in. Now, if you want to go to a Blades Brown and spend all of your salary, I still don't think that's a great idea. It's still probably a little bit too chalky, but you at least have a fighting chance of not duplicating yourself 1,000 different times now that you've made at least one pivot in your lineup for the large field GPP rather than having chalk at all 6 spots. Because, for example, if you would have taken a Blades Brown here, then left at that $7,500, if you take a piece of chalk at that number, which it actually doesn't look like there's any real chalk at this portion of the board, but let's assume that there was another 20%er here, you're duplicating yourself 20 to even 50 times in the large field GPP. So that's the kind of scenario that you really want to avoid. In cash, you just really want to prioritize projection. So if you're entering for cash, it's going to be a whole lot of lineups that are just jamming the top end of the board here. In fact, if I was building a cash lineup, this is probably what it would look like. Blowing a Blades Brown probably there. And I can't click all 6, but or else Draftkings will have a bitch fit about us going out there and showing you guys the absolute quote unquote nuts, apparently, right? This is just a rough draft of what I'd be going for in cash. But cash, though, you're prioritizing those top 10 finishing points and prioritizing just projection in general. So if there's anyone that's just clearly mispriced compared to where you have them on projection, you want to be jamming them in at all costs in this sort of a format. But a much different thought process than in large field GPPs where we had to be thinking about weighing ownership, right? Taking, balancing it between chalk and some of the guys that are a little bit more of contrarian pieces. This is a little bit more straightforward. In fact, if you have an optimizer and you have access to my projections, I would just upload my projections into your optimizer, hit optimize, and that top lineup that it spits out is what I would be running for round number 4. But the reason why we spent so much time in the large field GPPs as that sort of lineup construction is so much more interesting than what we have on the other side. But that's all I've got for the round 4 showdown process. So I hope to see you guys at the top end of the GPPs. If you guys want to do see that spreadsheet I was showing you guys before, make sure to check out the golf DFS tier. Like I was saying on there, it's got all the projections, my entire player pool on there, and with all the player pool tags towards the right. And as you've seen in the chat all week, we've had a ton of winners in the community, people using the tools, being able to leverage them to their advantage. If you haven't already become a member, then I don't know what you're waiting for at this point. You're missing out on the most accurate projections in the industry, the best player pool data that you can possibly find, and it's the cheapest of all the big DFS sites in the industry as well. So it's by far the best value, both from what you're getting and from the price standpoint. So like I said, if you haven't already signed up at this point, what the heck are you waiting for? You're missing out on a whole lot over there. Let me catch up on chat. Then we're going to go through the prop and the betting side. Any last second DFS questions, you guys can throw those in the chat. But we're going to go through averages, prize picks, and underdog props, which I'm hoping we finally have a board for. And looks like I got my wish there with a prize picks board. So we're going to have that to go through here in just a few minutes. But let me get a sip of my drink. Let's catch up on the chat, see if there's any questions to go through, and then try and find some value for tomorrow. Today was a slightly profitable day for props and betting. Round 1 was our big day this week. Didn't miss a single prop. But for the week, over +5 units of profit. I would like to make that 10 units, though. Another 4 or 5 unit day would be pretty sweet. So we'll see what we can do from that perspective. Any love for Rio? So in general, yes. I think Rio's a criminally underrated player, especially at courses that are more positional. In general, though, this week, his one shots gained round was round 1, as you guys can see here. Really good ball striking stats. Round 2, average ball striking stats. I'm just looking at the fairway and green percentage that you can see towards the right. Round number 3, same thing. Really not sticking out in either category. I mean, I have to give him a 6 out of 10. If you were just basing it on the round 1 stuff, it'd probably be a 7.5 out of 10. But the last 2 days were average, so we have to kind of bump him down closer to a 5 out of 10. So yeah, like a 6 out of 10 profile, I'd say. So yeah, a little bit of a love for Rio, especially because he's towards the bottom end of the pricing. And what is he, T24? Was that what I was seeing with his finishing position? At T24, he has placement point potential, but he's also not going to be one of the chalkier players that we have at that portion of the board. So I think some upside to be had there for sure. Robert McIntyre profile from 1 to 10. I got you. So McIntyre, let's see the last time he played the stadium course. So it wasn't today. He only hit 50% of his fairways, but he is a little bit of a sprayer. I call him a sprinkler off the tee. He'll miss left, right, center, you name it. He just kind of hits it all over the yard. Round number 2 is when he played the stadium course and he sucked ball striking. On top of just the shots gained profile not looking good here, like you can obviously see, he was on the feature group coverage in the eye test. Was his dog shit is what the numbers look like there. And then round 1, he played fantastically, though. That's where he got himself through the cut line pretty much. It was based on round 1 alone. The profile has to be below average, especially because the last 2 rounds were kind of sketchy for him. But I'm going to give him a 4 out of 10 because the round 1 that was also on some of the feature group coverage, and you saw him on the main coverage for round number 1, was some of the best form that we saw of the entire field. So just figure out what the hell he was doing on Thursday and try and channel that for tomorrow. I do have to say that T24 starting position is maybe my favorite starting spot for placement points because you can still finish top 10 at that kind of mark. Heck, even the guys one shot back can still probably finish top 10 because shooting -3 is not going to be enough. Like shooting -3 and then backdooring a top 10 because you're at the top end of the board is not going to be enough for the optimal lineup when you're going to see so many rounds of -5 or better. So, the -5 or better equity is the main thing that we're really focusing on, which is why guys like McIntyre are really standing out to me. So yeah, I'm okay with it. I'm going to give him a 4 out of 10 though, because the shots gained metrics weren't great. But he's still very playable. And in fact, he's probably one of the better leverage plays towards the very top end of the board. Let's go through some prop stuff. So the only course that we have in play, it's going to be the top one there, the stadium course. It is going to make our lives a little bit easier when it comes to handicapping this thing. However, we've got a few different things going on for tomorrow that are going to make these averages that we're looking at not the most accurate. So let's start with the most obvious one, the cut line. Anytime you have the cut line of the PGA Tour event, it's part of the reason why round 3 is one of the best rounds for us historically. The averages get better. And it's not just the fact that the more informed guys make the cut line. That's pretty fucking obvious if you ask me. If you're going to make it through the top 40, 50% of the field, you're obviously playing some of the best golf. But also, it's because some of those players have a lot more on the line. You're not going to get those guys, especially like you saw for round number 3, that couldn't give a rat's ass about what they're doing out there. They got a paycheck on the line. Even the guys that just hardly made the cuts are just a couple shots off of the top 25. So you're going to see them really be locked in. So this average is going to get easier. But then we have another thing going on as well. We've got the weather getting better for round 4. Rather than you can see constant wind that they were playing in this afternoon, it's going to be sub 3 miles an hour in the afternoon. So I think the cut line's going to make a difference, probably make it play at least -1, even -1.5. But it could play close to -2, even with some of those harder pin locations because of some of the cut line changes. So I think it's going to be a pretty drastic change from round to round. The only thing that we don't have as of right now would be those pin locations, which I'm actually going to check on Twitter right now to see if we have those to go through, because round 4 pins here can be pretty nasty. They're not always nasty at this golf course. It doesn't look like they have those posted yet. So we're not going to be able to go through those here on the live stream. But after we get off the live stream, and they'll probably post them at 10 p.m. That's spot in line with what they've done historically on the West Coast. We'll have to see what they're giving us, because if it's an easy pin setup, then maybe that -1 to -1.2 scoring average I was talking about before maybe even improves. Maybe it's like -1.5 to -2.5 if it's an easier pin setup, or if it's an extremely difficult pin setup, then maybe it's closer to like -0.5 to -1.5. But for now, without that sort of information, I'm going to put the projected scoring average at -1 to -2 with a heavier emphasis towards the -2 side. I would say -1 would be if they give us a really hard setup, if maybe that wind early in the day was a little bit harder than we are expecting. So that means that this birdie average, which was 3.82 per round today, is likely going to improve, probably to the 4 to even 4.5 range. I would say if it's going to play -2, 4.5 birdie average is well within play. The bogey or worse average is going to drop probably to about 2 per round. That's, 2 per round is probably where I'll put it almost regardless of what they do at the pins. Whereas the fairway average, the green averages down here will improve a bit, but it's not going to be a drastic change. Like the fairway average maybe goes up to like 8.5 per round. The green regulation average probably goes up to like 13.1, 13.2 per round. But in general, easier conditions than what you have here for round 3. And we'll incorporate that with our process for tomorrow. So I have not seen this board yet. This is going to be a true first take at what we have. So bear with me. I'm going to just absorb some of the board over the next maybe minute or two, see what we have for pricing, and figure out where there's some potential value. And I was looking at some of the DP World Tour stuff before as well. We do have that board posted. I at least want to throw out those averages now so that we don't have to go back to that later. So you can see those at the very bottom. Let me make sure that they're not cut off. Scoring average was the easiest of all week today. It was -0.46 last night. And the birdie or better average was also the best. That's been the entire week at 3.83 per round. But that came with the easiest weather and the calmest weather that we had the entire event as well. And tomorrow, it's going to be a lot more like what it was for days 1 and 2. So you can see there's some wind in there, wind gusts, especially towards the very end of play, that are really going to kick up. However, just like we said with the averages at the top, with the cut line making a pretty big difference, especially in a big field like this, it's the same thing for the Hero Dubai Classic. It was a cut line event. You have guys that did not make it to the weekend. So I don't think it's going to play -0.5 like you saw for round number 3, but probably about even par is what I would guess for Sunday. That's incorporating harder pin locations for Sunday. I'm not going to fully deep dive those DP World Tour pins most likely, but normally on Sunday, they are a little bit harder than what we typically see. So about an even par scoring average is what I'm using for that side of things. So we'll see if we want to add some value. There was one prop on that side that was really catching my eye. But I mostly want to break down this PGA board because that's, of course, our main focus here on this live stream. Also, guys, if you guys are on the sports books like Draftkings, Hard Rock Bet, and whatnot, we're going to go through some matchups here in like 10 to 15 minutes. But I want to see if we can find some value here for round number 4. So bear with me here as we go through this. Let me catch up on chat as I get a sip of this, and we'll try and see if we can find a community tail here. Since the stadium is the harder course, do we think we see a more traditional finish for these players instead of the birdie fest? Is it more normal? if this is a more normal round 4, what do I think is most important? Yeah, it will for sure be a more normal round 4. Like the scoring average, like you can see with the prop section, I have in like the -1 to -2 range. I don't think it's going to change that much, though. I talked about it with the weather at the very beginning. Like placement points are going to matter, but maybe not as much because the scoring's still going to be decent. But it's not going to be like super hard out there. Like I know you put harder in quotes. It's not going to be anything close to like an even par scoring average. If that were the case, and it were playing even to maybe over par, the adjustment would be that we want more guys at the top end of the board. We want more players starting in the top 10 if it's really going to be a hard event. But even though it is quote unquote harder, right, it's still going to be a relatively easy golf course compared to most that we see on tour. So the placement points matter, but they're not the end all be all. Is not really an adjustment that we have to make, but that's the kind of strategy that we have. So hopefully that answers your question for you. A little bit less of a birdie fest, but still some pretty easy scoring compared to most weeks. How about our guy, Matt McCarty? Yeah, man, I bet him this week, so I'm hoping he can make a run for us. But let's look at the stat profile because I'm guessing that's what you want to look at. So he played the stadium course today, lost a little bit off the tee, but then gained 2 on approach and in the short game categories. This is a 6 out of 10 stat profile because he did gain in the most important stat category. Losing off the tee is not ideal. Also being a little bit short game dependent isn't ideal, but the gaining on approach more than overtakes that in my opinion. So 6 out of 10 stat profile up the course fit. This is why I bet him this week is immaculate. He makes a shit ton of birdies. He played about the Black Desert Championship, another wide open birdie fest like what you had for this week. I don't think he's an ideal course fit necessarily for the stadium course. I think he's like maybe a 7 out of 10 course fit for the stadium course. But the other 2 courses this week, he was a 10 out of 10 course fit. So yeah, an above average play, I would say. And with the placement point potential that he has is very usable for showdown lineups. He said, like metrics, recent form, putting, etc. I don't think there's really any changes there, man. I don't think that's something that you have to account for that much just because the golf course is a little bit harder. Like, for example, the recent form and shots gained metrics perspective, like the ball striking, no change whatsoever. The putting aspect, maybe a little bit less POA overseed guys than what we had the last couple of days, which I personally went with my player pool. There's only a couple POA overseed guys making their way into my player pool, but that's about it. That's a good question now that I think about it. It's a nuanced question, but not big differences, but little ones, right? Like maybe slightly less on the scoring stats than what we had the first couple of days. Like, for example, even the high upside tab, I'm using a little bit less than what we used for rounds 2 and 3. So that's a good question. And something I really didn't think of until you asked about it, but it's a good point. Chinese SpongeBob and Smotherman over on birdies is a lock. Yeah, let's take a look at this board. Dude, I love Chinese SpongeBob. My guy, Hao Tong, the Long Dong. Also, Austin Smother Me in money. So you're not going to get that much pushback from me, man. You said you've also got 140 to 1 on McCarty. Holy shit, you got a better number than I did. And you got Siwoo at 50 to 1. You've got a good Sunday ahead of you. You took down 2 GPPs this week. We got to start asking you for your plays, Alan. You're going off this week. What's going on, Go Collect? Nice to have you in here. Also, Hoobs in chat as well. Let me know if you guys have any questions. We've been live for 45 minutes now, so we're just finishing up the DFS section. But let's see what we can find on the prop side. So we got a little drink in the cup, a little bit of whiskey and Coke for the first time in a while. But let's see what we have for these projections, which is kind of what I was expecting so far. Like 70.5 for your average players is literally where I would put them. So it's kind of disappointing to see that it looks like Prize Picks has the board exactly where I would put it for the most part. But that's not to say it's going to be that way with every single player. Like there's probably going to be at least a few pieces of value that we can still snag at this point. But the pricing in general, at least we'll give some credit to these guys. They get it wrong a lot of the time. Looks like they did a half decent job this time. So 70.5 on the Smotherman. Yeah, he's like one of those guys at the projected field average. You don't love to see that, to be honest. I would have much rather than posted a board that was completely off. Now, this birdie or better board looks a bit aggressive, I would say. Not so much with these elite tier players. Having a Minwoo Erasmus at 5, so be it. I'm totally fine with that. But it's more so like the SH Kims of the world, the Gary Woodlands that are average birdie makers. Having them at 4.5 birdies is, like I said, a little aggressive compared to where I would have it. Because to go back to those averages, I think it's going to be like a 4 to maybe a 4.5 birdie average. 4.5 is on the high side of that spectrum. So like the SH Kims, the Woodlands that I grade out as about field average players, now that the cut line's been made, I don't know if I would love them as much value at this point. So like Denny McCarthy, for example, is at 4.5. He's a much better player than those two. Like they should not be at the same projection. So maybe Denny could be valued towards the over, like even Matt Kuchar, they have it that same sort of number. There's Mr. Smother Me and Money that we were saying before. There's Mr. McCarty at 4.5. McCarty's an elite tier birdie maker, so that one's kind of tempting to me. Let's see where DraftKings has these. And I've got to admit, guys, I've got to pee. I think I might go and run to the bathroom real quick before we truly break down these boards, because it's kind of distracting me. I hate to say that, but it's true. It's kind of throwing me off a little bit. So I might go do that here in a second. But McCarty's minus 128. Okay, that's good to see on there. Who are some of the other ones we had on there? I want to look at Denny McCarthy's birdie line. Actually, I already saw that. That one was like minus 125. Let's look at SH Kim for the under, actually. I kind of want to line shop that, and then Gary Woodland too. So let's see. It's not find C. We want to find the other Kim, who I guess doesn't have a line. Let's look at Woodland. Probably doesn't have a line. Yeah, doesn't have one posted there either. I will be back in 30 seconds. I'm going to go take a quick number one, and we'll find the props to enter, and I'll get right back. If you guys haven't already smashed that like button, go ahead and do so, and hit me up with any questions that you've got. We obviously already went over the DFS side, but if there's any questions on that side, I will still cover them at this point in the live stream. If there's any props that you guys are seeing, I know my guy Jose before was looking at Mr. Haltong, Lee, and Smotherman for the over. Let me know what you're looking at for props, because this is my first time looking at the board. We're going to have to look at a few of the other categories that they have posted on there too. Let's see if we can find a community tail. But like I said, I've got to go to the restroom, so I will be right back. And I may top off the drink as well. So here we go. Promise you it would be quick. No top off in the drink. We're actually pretty good on that right now. But as I was thinking through this, I'm going to take a look at this DraftKings board and where they have some of these other guys at 4.5 birdies. Because even though we don't have a line for somebody like a Woodland or an SH Kim, I mean, we can use some of their peers as comparison on here. So let's do that. Like a Sadier, because he's minus 152 under. I mean, that's some pretty serious value. Your elite tier guys like Erasmus, he's minus 164 over. So there's going to be value in both directions based on what we're seeing on here. But I'm looking for a mid to a lower tier player. And I wouldn't call Nick Taylor a lower tier player, but he's actually even money at that at that sort of projection. So if we can find a below average player like John Perry, because he's minus 134 towards the under, I'd even call him like an average player in this sort of field. We could probably find some value for that under at 4.5, which was kind of like my sneaking suspicion that some of these lines looked maybe a little bit too optimistic from where they should be. By the way, the guy that was taking the over at 4.5 on Smotherman, Jose, maybe take him on the sports books instead, just because he is minus 130 towards the under. Taking the over in a pick'em site that's pretty much minus 130 towards the over would just be a bad line, right? So I'd probably avoid that if you can. Haltong, though, looks a little bit better at that minus 125. So just trying to get a sense for where the sport is. And honestly, this is what I do when I'm entering props myself. I like to kind of absorb where the boards are, figure out where the value is, and then kind of evaluate it afterwards and figure out what we're going to enter. And it's nice to be able to have props beforehand, because I am able to expedite this process in the live stream a little bit. But because we are doing this on the live stream together, you guys are going to get to see the process of finding some of this prop value so that you can start to do it for yourself out there. And we went through the strokes and birdies, which I actually thought were pretty accurate for the most part. But let's go through the birdie or better matchups and the rest of the categories that we have on here, which aren't my favorite. Vast majority of the props that you see me enter will be those first two categories. Every once in a while, we find some value over here. And with these 0.5 matchups, I guess I'll just throw it out here right now. A lot of times the value is towards the under, because if these guys end up tying at their projection, the under ends up being a win rather than a push on these. So, and the reason why there could be value towards the under is if you can find somebody that's the opponent in these matchups that has a similar, if not a better birdie percentage than the guy that is listed as the main guy, then you're getting the extra 0.5 birdies on top of them being the same, if not a better birdie maker. So That's why there can be some value on this category. In the other direction, it's not like you can't find value towards the overs. It's just that it's very hard to do when you have that 0.5 on it. The 0.5 birdies is a much bigger difference than you probably think. And the best way to put that into context, by the way, is that Scottie Scheffler, by far the best player that we have in the world. Last year, he gained 0.94 birdies or better per round compared to the PGA Tour average. That is the best example, one of the best seasons that we've ever had. In fact, one of the weakest strengths of field of the PGA Tour that we've ever had in history because of Live Tour, because of the DP World Tour, taking away some of the top level talent. Even then, he only gained 0.94 birdies or better to the field. So this half a birdie that you're seeing right there is the difference between an average player and like a top 20 player on the PGA Tour. So that's why the unders are more than often the value, as the talent gap difference has to be pretty massive for there to be value towards the over. In fact, look at this on Scottie Scheffler. He's got a 1.5 birdie or better matchup. I can't even remember the last time that we've seen that on somebody. So that's like Scottie being at 6 birdies and then maybe Alex Smalley being at 4.5. I'm just going to stay away from that. I honestly don't even know how to handicap that sort of a thing. That feels like, at least not right now, not on live stream now. I'd have to actually go through and run sims and stuff to look at that sort of projection. These 0.5s are a lot more doable though. So let me get a sip of this. Let's see if there's any ones that really stand out. Which I got to say, as of now, doesn't look like a whole ton of them stand out towards the under. The one that kind of does on here, which I don't know if I have the stones to take it because Russell Henley looked really good today, is that Keith Mitchell, if you take a look at the birdie or better percentage from last year, which we're actually going to do here together. 1 second while I bring out the PGA Tour website, and I'll reshare my screen so you guys can see this. Take a look at the birdie or better stats from 2025. Keith Mitchell blows away Russell Henley, and that's still despite Henley being pretty good in this category. If we take a look at Mitchell, at least it was for most of the year. Oh, actually, he fell off. Mitchell this is this season. We got to go back to 2025 to get the stats I was looking for. Mitchell, number 6 in birdie or better percentage. Going to be hard to beat him, right? Henley was still good this year. He had one of his best seasons, if not his best season as a professional. And even then, he was number 42 on the PGA Tour. So in this case, you've got Keith Mitchell, who's the better birdie or better percentage player, and he's getting an extra 0.5 birdies. Now, I'm going to throw this at least in the shopping cart because at least per the line value, it makes sense to take that sort of under. The other aspect of this, though, and the reason why I might not end up playing this myself is because Russell Henley looks so good heading into Sunday. I mean, hitting the ball well, losing short game, should be due for a little bit of regression there. Also, a fantastic course fit at this positional sort of golf course. But per the numbers, especially based on the long-term sample size that we're looking at there, Keith Mitchell would be the play on that sort of a matchup. But I can't do it. I'm going to take him out of there for now, or at least for now. Maybe we'll go back to it just because of the fact that Russell Henley sets up so well from the shots gained perspective. Par lines, I never play. There's going to be almost zero chance that I do so unless something is just drastically off. In fact, I'm not even going to waste the time here on live stream going through that one. But let's look at the bogey or worse lines. So we've got Nick Taylor, Joel Damon, Cantlay, Cole, Wyndham Clark, and Kim at this sort of numbers. Let's go back to the bogey or worse average. So the bogey or worse average today was 2.44, and that was before the cut line, and that was with pretty hard conditions this afternoon. I think that's going to improve for tomorrow. So if any of these guys that are at 2.5, like a Damon, Cole, are better than average bogey avoiders, then they would be obvious plays at that sort of number. So I want to line shop that. I don't think either of them are. I think both of them are below average bogey avoiders, but let's at least do our due diligence on that just in case I'm wrong. So an Eric Cole first was number 103, which was about PGA Tour average. So it's actually not the worst bet that I've seen. And let's look at Joel Damon too. Joel Damon was number 90. Now, Damon is going to rank better for this year-long list. But keep in mind that Joel Damon was not a full-time member last year, and he did not get into the signature events. He did not play at a lot of the harder events that we had on the season. Eric Cole plays every single week on the PGA Tour. So I would actually say that this number 103 from Cole is more impressive than the 90 that we see there on Damon. I'm not sure if either one is obvious value, though. So just to kind of vet this, I do want to see what they have them at here on DraftKings if they do have a number for either of one of those two players. So let's do Damon and then Cole. They probably don't. So yeah, no Damon line, probably no Cole line too. So they do have a Cole line at minus 134 towards the under. It's at least somewhat tempting. I do kind of want to see those pin locations first before I fire the trigger on that sort of thing, but that would be slight line value. We had the slight line value on this under on Russell Henley as well. I know we were looking at some of these birdie or better lines before, like there were some unders at 4.5 that might make sense. I've got to be honest, like there are some decent leans that we're finding here so far, but the obvious value that we've had for some of the first couple rounds doesn't look to necessarily be there. And let's look at the fairway average. Fairway average, I do think will maybe slightly go up to like 8.25 to 8.5 per round at the very most. So when we're looking at this, I actually see something that's really good value. And it makes me think that there's going to be other really good pieces of value that we have on here. But let's continue to go through this. The average will maybe go up to like 8.5 per round. So we do have to keep that in our back pocket. Yeah, and there actually looks like there's maybe even a couple other examples of the same sort of prop. Let me look something up real quick. I don't want to say it because the Prize Picks line maker is probably watching. And I at least want to make sure that I get this in on my this content account at the very least. Let's see. So Sam Stevens, number 57 in fair percentage. Okay, it's good to know. Were the other ones on there? It sucks that I can't say it out loud because I just know they're watching and they're just waiting to slate this line because of how much I like it. Let's see. Oh my God, if I could type Bridgman right, that would really help me out. He was number 96 at hitting fairways. I have this up for the right season, right? No, you need to go to the season before to get this correct. So Stu Bridgman, number 92, so about tour average. To go back to Stevens because we had the wrong sample size up. Stevens was number 109. Okay, so the prop I'm looking at, I'll just point it out, is this Rasmus Højgaard under on fairways. Rasmus is not a very good driver of the golf ball. He is extremely inaccurate in that category. If the average is going to be about 8.5 per round, you can bet my ass that I'm playing the under at that 8.5. So that's the main one on that. I'm actually going to bring up Data Golf so that we can take a look at his driving accuracy metrics, which I actually don't think have been as terrible lately, but in general, he's not a very accurate driver of the golf ball. But just to show you why, I think it's pretty obvious towards the under. Let's look at his driving accuracy. So he's lost accuracy. He's actually gained in 3 of his last 4. So I guess that's why they have him at the field average. But look at the rest of the season. I mean, he lost in like 8 of his first 9 to start the year. He gained, and then he lost in like 4 or 5 more. He gained, and then he lost in a couple more. He has been okay lately, but that was on the DP World Tour. And on the PGA Tour, he did not qualify for the averages last year, but he would have been like dead last in the category when it comes to driving accuracy. So we're at least going to keep that one in the back pocket. I think that's probably one of the better props that we've seen so far, that Rasmus Højgaard under. And I guess we could talk the DP World Tour prop that I was looking at. That was a Patrick Reed under on strokes. So to go back to the averages, the average was slightly under par today. I do think it's going to get a little bit harder, most likely with moving day pin locations and the winds kicking up a bit. But if it's an even par average, asking Patrick Reed to gain a stroke to the field to cover this is not too much, in my opinion. In fact, that feels pretty reasonable for somebody that's leading this event, is playing some of the best golf of anyone in this field. And not only just that, on the Live Tour the last year, he was a top 10 player on that tour. So on the DP World Tour, he's an elite tier player when it comes to talent level. So he is a 4-shot leader. He is going to have some nerves, but we're not talking about some slapdick loser or some, blades round that's 18 with the lead or 1 shot off the lead. That is probably literally going to be shaking on the first tee. This is a big dick Patrick Reed. This is former Ryder Cupper that was shushing Rory McIlroy after making long putts. They are not built the same. So nerves, not a thing for Patrick Reed. They pretty much don't exist. I'm pretty much handicapping him as a normal round, even despite that 4-shot lead. And if it is going to be about an even par scoring average, I've got him at a 1 to even 1.5 shots gained baseline. So that's why I would have that as value towards the under. The books don't agree with that sentiment. They have him at 71.5 and he's even money. So that's why I haven't entered that one quite yet. But that under on Patrick Reed, at least from my traditional analysis standpoint, should be like minus 150 towards the under. And if I had seen that minus 150 or even like a minus 130 towards the under on the sports books, this would have already been entered for me on the Patrick Reed side. So I do want to throw that out there as a potential piece of line value. I'm going to catch up on chat, see what we have in terms of any questions on bets. and then we're going to figure out a community tail for tomorrow. But based on what I've seen so far, these are probably my favorite 2 leans. Not 100% sure that they're going to be ones that I fire on quite yet. But let's refresh this PGA board, see if we have anything posted over there that's obvious value. And then, like I said, catch up on the chat. So they got Ben Griffin at 68.5 with a multiplier towards the under. It looks like they've pretty much just copy and pasted the sportsbook lines in a lot of cases there. Let's look at where Hen Dog's at. So Henley's at, 69 flat on a prize fix. Just doing a little bit of line comparison from site to site. Let's look at Siwoo. Siwoo does have the nerves of being in the lead, but it does feel like maybe that's slight value to have him at 69.5 as opposed to 69 flat. But he's at 69.5 on both sites. Let's at least do a little bit of line comparison on DraftKings then to see what they have his 69.5 at. It looks like it's minus 132 towards the under. So like even that could be a potential piece of line value that we mix in. Let's see. And he's at the same number over here. So I'm going to throw that in the shopping cart as well. Siwoo Kim, by the way, elite tier course history. He's won at this track before. He's really good at the positional golf courses with a lot of water on it. An accurate driver, a good player on this Bermuda grass overseed. So, or should I say Poa overgrass overseed. So something else that I'm going to throw out there. But let's continue through this. So 67.5 for Scotty. What was Scotty over here? I don't think he was 67.5, right? Yeah, I guess he was at that same exact number. That feels aggressive. Shooting -5 at this course is far from a gimme. In fact, yeah, he's even money at that number. If I was setting the number, he would be juiced towards the over. It's 67.5. I'll just say that right off the bat. But I'm not fading the GOAT on Sunday. There's no chance in hell that I'm taking a stance against who's clearly the best player alive right now. You have Matt Fitzpatrick, -128 towards the under at that 69.5 number 2. Just good to have this baseline in our back pocket. And I kind of want to look at these fairway lines too. So let's see what they have up for fairways. Just because we had that one under on Rasmus that was kind of really sticking out. Similar projections from website to website, a whole lot of multipliers, which I don't like to see. Tom Hoge juiced towards the under. That's kind of surprising. In fact, I don't want to look at that. Tom Hoge is normally a pretty accurate. I'm not going to call him like elite tier accuracy, but normally not dog shit there. This year was probably dog shit because he was terrible with his form. But let's go back to the year before that. Let's go back to 2024. He's gaining more than he's losing off the tee with the accuracy. That's that right category. Let's go to 2023 too. I mean, the beginning of the year, he's doing what we want. He's hitting a lot more fairways than most. And then towards the end of the year, he kind of fell off. It's a tough one for me. Let's look at let me look at the sportsbook line. If he had been a little bit more consistent off the tee, that would probably be a no-brainer over for me, especially because he's not super long and would probably take a few layups. But look at that, -156 towards the under. I mean, I just don't agree with that, like at all. Like him having that much juice towards the under, but I guess that line exists. Let's look at Putnam. Putnam's an accurate player. And I do think the average, well, sorry, he's at 9.5. I thought that was 8.5 fairways that we had on him. 9.5 was probably fair to have him one higher than the average. Let me catch up on chat. Then let's figure out what we're going to enter here. Hey, Luke, how do we feel about Siwoo for the over at 69.5? If you're entering it, enter it on a sports book because on DraftKings, he is -132 towards the under. And I don't know if I love that. Like, I do think the scoring average might be -1.5 to maybe -2 at the very best. That means he has to gain a stroke to the field. Siwoo Kim is somebody that gains strokes to the field in most cases. So I actually think I'd be going the opposite direction, especially with his form so far. But hopefully that answers that for you. Also, you tuned in late. Is everyone playing on the same course? Yes, it'll all be on the stadium course for tomorrow. So valid question. And yeah, all on the stadium course, which is the hardest of the bunch. Nice. You hadn't seen that noted. Okay. Thoughts on Eric Cole for tomorrow? In general, I like Eric Cole at these easier, more wide open tracks off the tee. Unfortunately, this is the hardest track off the tee that he's playing this week. So for this course, he's probably a 5 out of 10. For the other courses, like 8 out of 10 with the course. But yeah, pretty average for me, man. Run of the mill, 5 out of 10 course fit. He's playing well this week, but I do worry about the driving accuracy at times. Any birdie better matchups that pique my interest? So yeah, I was looking at that one with the under on Henley, but I don't know if I can really pull the trigger on that just because Henley has such a good course fit heading into the last round. It just posted whole locations. Can we look at those? Yes, we can. He said Cheestoke Hoagie is not contending. Yeah, he's had a really rough last year. So I tend to agree with you for the most part. Then he said Blades. Dude, first off, what a name for a golfer, having Blades as your first name. And I hope he plays well tomorrow, man. A lot of times these guys in this situation end up having a lot of pressure and whatnot, but I'm hoping they keep it together. Let's refresh this because they did post the pin locations. Like I thought they were going to do that at 10 p.m. And let me bring out the PGA Tour website because we're going to go hole by hole and we're going to see in comparison to what they had with rounds 1 through 3. They did not change for the first 3 days, how easy or how difficult those pin locations were. So 1 second, I'm bringing up the PGA Tour website so that we can go through the shot tracker. Also bring that up over here. And let's see, because this could really matter. And it's a good thing we haven't entered anything yet, because this could move the scoring average by a half a stroke to a stroke in either direction. So let's do this. So let's go to round number 1. Let's get the damn ad off the screen. I'm too nice to use an ad blocker, but I probably should at this point. Hole number 1 is middle left. So compared to the first couple days, I would say it's the exact same difficulty. And you might be slightly tempted to say it's easier because you have a slope in front of it. That's going to help you feed shots that are short a little bit closer, and a slight backstop there as well. But you kind of had that going for the first couple of rounds too. You had a lot of slope in the middle of the green, which helped you move it from the center over towards that pin location, and a little bit of a backstop back there as well. So the pin location at 1 is not really going to be any different than the first couple of days. Let's go to 2 next. So 2 is going to be in the very back left corner. Let me make this a little bit bigger so you guys can see this as well. So it was right under the slope for the first 3 rounds, and now it's going to be in the back left corner. I would say that this one is slightly more difficult, but it's not drastically harder because you do have this little side slope to help you out and this little slope in front of it to help you push you closer. So actually, now that I think about it, I'm going to call the difficulty here about the exact same as the first 3 days, just like we had at hole number 1. Next up, we have 3, which is in the front right corner. This is an easier pin location than the first couple of days, so I think you're going to see some scoring there. You did have a backstop in this back corner, but it is a longer shot in, so I'd maybe give it like a 0.1 to a 0.2 shot difference at hole 3. Let's go to hole 4 next. So 4 is a middle left. Okay, let's get to hole 4. So we can get to this middle left pin location. I would say, actually, let me see how far up it is. So it's, okay, so it's 23 paces on. So it is over the slope. I would say a little bit more difficult than what you had for the first couple days. Reason for that is that it's over this little bit of a slope that my cursor's over right now. If it were below it, that's why I went back to the pin sheet to see how far on the pin location was. If it were down here, it would be easier than what we had for the first 3 days. Because it's on top, it is maybe slightly more difficult than this neutral pin location towards the right. Let's go to 5 next. So 5 is going to be a back right corner. It's way harder. I can just tell you immediately. A way harder pin location here. It is going to still be very reachable in 2, but if you're going at it with a wedge, having this front pin location with this bit of a backstop in the low area is an easier shot than to this back right corner. So I think the scoring average will probably actually get easier at this hole. And that's something else to throw out here as well, is we're talking about the pin location difficulty, not the average for these actual holes. The pin location might be slightly more difficult, but because the field has been cut down, you have the more informed players playing and guys that have more on the line, the scoring average either stays the same, if not even gets slightly easier compared to the first couple of days. And that's also part of the reason why the scoring average, I think, is going to get easier as well. Let's go back to this. So let's go to hole 6 next, which is in the very back right corner. This looks like a harder pin location. And actually, yeah, it is a harder pin location. I was going to say way harder, but it's not going to be way harder. The reason why I hesitate from saying way harder is that you don't have to worry about this water in front. Now that it's a back pin location, the main water concern is going to be towards the right side, which was still there with this front pin location. So I think the scoring average might get slightly harder here, but you're talking about very minute differences. It'd be like 0.05 to 0.1 strokes in the harder direction, if not the same difficulty, because the higher quality players are going to be playing this hole now. Next up, we have 7, which is in the very back left corner. This is a short par 4, a more positional hole. I would say that the scoring average here is going to get easier, and the pin location is probably about the same. The reason why I say that is that now the water's out of play, so that does help the players, but it is going to be a slightly longer shot in, so that probably makes up for that. But the reason why the scoring average gets better is that you have more quality players, hitting into what is a slightly bull pin location. So I think you're going to see a lot of birdies at 7, and you can afford to be more aggressive now rather than having Siwoo Kim obviously didn't adhere to this roll today, but rather than hitting it like 10 to 15 feet past the hole and then just taking your par, I think players are going to be a lot more aggressive to this back left corner. But obviously, Siwoo does not care about being aggressive and hit it to 3 feet 10 inches today. That's pretty impressive. Let's go to the next hole. So next up, we have 8, which is going to be in the back left corner. Looks like a slightly harder pin location than the first couple of days, just because it's a longer shot in and it's not on a low area. So one of the few holes so far that might be like 0.1 to 0.2 shots harder. Let's go up to 9. 9's in the very back right corner. I would say a slightly harder pin location, but this pin for rounds 1 through 3 was the second hardest pin that you have at this hole. So actually, you know what? I take it back. Because of this little bit of a backstop that you have behind it over here, this is actually going to be an easier pin location than the first few days, and especially because you have the better players playing that hole. Next up, we have 10, which is a back left pin. This is also an easier pin location. It looks harder because it's a longer shot in, but because you're farther away from the water, people can afford to be more aggressive, and you also have a little bit more room to hit the ball close. So that's one where the scoring average should get better. Let's go to 11. 11 is in the front left corner. This is a long par 5, so that shorter distance is going to help you. And I mean, think about if you're Siwoo Kim here. Siwoo Kim hit it just in front of the green. If it was a front left pin location, it is a relatively short chip. That is also going to be an easier pin location. Based on what we've seen so far, it looks like there's a theme. It looks like it's actually not going to be that tough of a Sunday setup. Let's go to 12. 12 is going to be on the front right corner of the screen. This is the easiest pin that you can play at this hole. I would say the bogey rate's not going to change much, because if you short side yourself in this bunker, it's going to be tough to get it up and down, but the birdie rate is going to get a little bit higher. So that's why I think it's a little bit easier. Let's go to 13 next. 13 is a back left pin. Okay, this is infamous at this course. They always use this back left pin, and it is way, way harder than rounds 1 through 3. So this is the only pin so far, by the way, that is obviously set up as difficult and that is meant to trip players up. If we take a look at the first couple ones we've seen so far, the first 13 holes, there have been no other examples of that. Let's go to 14. 14 is in the very back middle. This is going to be a much easier pin location the way you had the first couple days. You're going to have more room to hit the wedge shot in there, and it's towards the fat side of the green. So that's another one that's slightly easier and set up for scoring. We'll go to 15 next. 15 is in the very back middle, kind of towards the left over here, but I would say maybe marginally more difficult just because it's a longer shot into the green, and it is going to be like 470 from the yardage. So the length may be a little bit of a problem, but the actual like pin location is almost the exact same as what you had in that front little corner. Next up, we have 16, the long par 5. It's going to be a front pin. This is another one that's easier. So based on what we've seen so far, the bogey average is still going to go down a little bit, even with holes like 13 that are impossibly difficult. But the birdie average, I think, is going to go substantially up because the par 5s actually look easier in the first couple of days. 17's towards the middle right. This is a pretty tough one. Probably a little bit tougher than rounds 1 through 3 even, just because it's closer towards the right. But with no wind, it's going to play easier than it did this afternoon. The wind is the main cause of difficulty at 17. Not only do you have the island green, pretty obvious there, but this tee box, you can kind of see it when I drop us down to the head level view. It's elevated compared to the rest of the golf course. So that wind affected it even more this afternoon than it will for tomorrow. And then finally, we've got 18, which is a back left pin. This is also one of the harder pin locations that you have this course. And think about it. I mean, it's 18, right? They've got to set up a Sunday pin location somewhere. So they're going to do it there at 18, and then 13, the one that is infamous at this sort of a course. So the only hard pin locations are those two. And then you have the rest of the golf course, which I would say is arguably set up easier than what you had for the first couple of days. So to go back to the averages, I said a -1 to -2 scoring average. Let's go -1.5 to -2 now. Let's eliminate that -0.5. I think we can comfortably do that now that we've seen these averages. Now, the other thing I want to do is I want to look at the round 1 and 2 averages at the stadium course, because I might even being a little bit conservative about it. Like if we go back to round 1 at the stadium course, I played -1.3. Round 2 played -1.79. I don't think the pin locations are that much different than these 2 days. I mean, round 3, the same thing. The winds were just higher. Round number 3, However, now we have much better players playing on Sunday. So the conditions are probably the same as the first couple rounds, but the average, when we take a look at the round 4 scoring after the fact, I almost want to say -1.5 to -2.5 as the scoring average now, because I think there's a chance that it plays significantly easier than it did in round number 2. So we can use that to our advantage. And now that I've thought about it, it does feel like the positive stance plays for the PGA side might be the way to go about this. So let's go back to the strokes and the birdie or better boards and see what we can find for value, especially now that we know that these pin locations aren't going to be nearly as difficult as they could be. And figure out what we can find for value. And by the way, any props you guys want to go through, feel free to let me know. After we do this, we are going to go through some of the matchups on DraftKings. So I like the under rasp, but still the fairway lines, right, don't come down to the pin locations. So that one's not going to change for me all that much. What will change is maybe the Siwoo Kim under, which was -130 towards the under. I actually think that might even be more value now that we've seen some of these pin locations. The only issue with him would be the slight choke factor and the slight pressure factor because of his position on the board. So I'm going to look and see if there's any other 69.5s that maybe make a little bit more sense than what we had on that one. But if not, I'm totally fine on rolling this out as our 2-man for tomorrow. This would be a 3x payout because of the over and the fade that we're taking there together. But let me see. So the Siwoo Kim's at 69.5 seem pretty fair. Let me see what Fitzpatrick is for his strokes line, because that was the other 69.5 that I wanted to look at. So yeah, he's almost -130 towards the under as well. We'll take these two together. This will be the 2-man slip that we play for the live stream. So to be under on Rasmus fairways, if the average is going to be about 8.5 per round, he's a well below average fairway percentage player. So I'll take that all day. And then you'll have the under on Siwoo Kim strokes as well. I think the average score might be -1.5 to -2.5. Let's split it down the middle and let's say that it's a -2 scoring average. That's asking Siwoo Kim to gain a stroke to the field. That's a reasonable ask, given that his baseline is about a stroke gained per round to the field. But also, this is a course where he's playing excellently this week and that he's won at in the past. And by the -130 plus odds towards the under on DraftKings, I thought that that was worthy of playing. So we're going to take those two together. Let me see. Did Rasmus have a fairway line, by the way? I'm kind of mind blown. Yeah, he did have a fairway line posted over here in DraftKings. He's at 8.5. So it's not like at a different projection, but he is -132 towards the under. So that's -130 odds in both directions, which is not quite a plus EV value. But when you add that on top of the traditional analysis that we got to in both cases, I think it makes it more than worth playing at that 3x value. So that'll be the first prize pick slip that I'm taking for round number 4. For the rest of the exposure that I'm playing for Sunday, you guys can find that on my Patreon page. Everything on prize picks, everything on Underdog that I end up entering myself, you guys can find over there. And I was going to say, maybe they took the Patrick Reed one off because it bumped, but it looks like they locked the board at 10:14. So it wasn't a bump that caused that one over there. A little bit of a false alarm. But let's go over to the matchup board, see what we have for round number 4. And Hard Rock Bet is where I'm going to get all my exposure for matchups. So I'm not going to know as of right now whether I'm entering any of these or not. But they do have pretty similar odds to DraftKings in most cases. So at least want to see if there's anything that is obviously mispriced so that we can do some line shopping on it later on the Hard Rock Bet side of things and figure out if there's anything worth entering. But like I said before, guys, Patreon page, golf prop tier is how you guys can get access to everything I'm entering on Underdog and Prize Picks and any matchups I'm entering too. But let's get a sip of this drink. Let's figure out what's standing out. Billy Horschel only -132 versus Zicheng Dao. I mean, is there really only two balls posted? I guess, sorry, there's the 3 balls posted for a vast majority of the field. Billy Horschel only -132 versus Zicheng Dao. That is disrespectful versus Horschel. And let's actually go over here to bet the number so I can show you guys some of this. Something that they added that I think is the absolute nuts over here is they added the groups towards the left. And I'm not sure if they updated them for round 4 yet. And they haven't updated them for round number 4 quite yet. But over here, this groupings tab that you see here towards the left is going to save us so much time when we're going through these matchups. And whenever they load them in for round number 4, you can just click a matchup and it's going to show you the shots gained metrics for those 2 players. But because we do need to find a custom matchup for this one, we'll just go ahead and do that by hand. So let's go with Billy Horschel first. Go Zicheng Dao as the other player in this 2-ball. And we're going to look at the last 24 rounds, which it looks like it's still favorable towards Horschel, but Zicheng Dao has been playing pretty decent golf his last few times out on tour. So the fact that it's still favorable towards Horschel just shows you how much value there is in that direction. And if you give me that minus 132 odds or even better on the Hard Rock Bet side, then I'm going to be entering that later on. But let's go through some of these 3-ball odds. That's where the vast majority of these groups are going to be. There are a couple 2-balls just because of the odd amount of people. It's not divisible by 3, obviously. The amount of players that made the cut, 73. Yeah, not divisible by 3. And you're one player off. If one more guy missed the cut, they could have done it in just 3 sums and had an even amount. But what I'm normally looking for in these 3 balls, unlike in the 2 sums where I'm normally looking for guys around even money that should be clear favorites, my 3-ball strategy is a bit different. And this is just what I prefer. I'm not saying that this is the optimal strategy for playing 3-balls. This is just what I find the most success with in my long-term results, is finding long shots that are close to plus 200 odds. Plus 200 odds. If everyone was a third chance to win and there was no inherent juice on the books, everyone would be plus 200, right? That's how the odds work on a lot of these sites. So what I look for are guys close to that plus 200 mark, if not even over that plus 200 mark, that have better than a third chance to win. So just looking through these, I don't see any in the first couple matchups that we have on the board here, but I do want to go through them and see if there's any that kind of stand out. This one does, because I don't think Jordan Smith should be plus 130 to win in any sort of matchup. So I'm not sure if I can really pull the trigger on a Rio or a Matthew Pavon, but like maybe one of those two would be worth like a half unit sprinkle. Let's keep going through these. Thigala is coming back. He does look a lot better than normal, but he's in a juggernaut group against English and Minwoo, so that's going to be a fade for me on that one. Kiefer is plus 200, which is that number we're looking for, but he's also in a juggernaut group against an Adam Scott and Nick Taylor, who are both top 25 players in this field, so that's also going to be a no-go for me as well. Let's see, Smalley versus McGreevy and Phillips, Fitzy versus Cootie and Damon. This seemed pretty accurate. Berger versus Bazane-Hood and Chatfield. Chatfield, I'm not going to bet him at plus 320, but I do look rather highly on Chatfield's chances on tour. He's one of those high potential players that I'm really looking forward to watching this season. You've got Fowler versus Dan Bachow. Probably butchered that last name, but he's got the funky grip with the putter going that we saw last week. Ben Griffin, Sam Burns is an absolute death row of a group, but Ryan Gerard at plus 230 with those ball striking stats was at least somewhat tempting when I saw that number on there. Henley should be the big favorite. He is the best player other than Scotty Scheffler of the guys that made the cut, but yeah, I don't know if I could bet that, of course, especially against 2 quality players like a Stevens and a Haotong Li. Still looking for some of those longer shots. Like this one might not even be a terrible group to go after. The one that I'd be betting, if anything, there would be a Carson Young at close to plus 200. Probably not good enough odds for me to bet it myself, as I do think that Castillo's got a slightly better chance to win. But Zach Johnson should be clearly the third favorite in that group for me, and Carson Young should probably be closer to plus 160 to plus 170. So maybe that one's even playable when I see what we have on Hard Rock Bet. But let's keep going through these. The scam odds in that group, nobody's plus 200 or more. That's when you know they're absolutely taxing you on that specific group. Look at Wyndham versus Cole and a Hoagie. Yeah, it's a stay away from me. I would probably go Cole or Hoagie there just because Wyndham Clark can be a little bit of a loose cannon. And then, yeah, you're never betting against Scotty in the 3-ball matchup like this, but you're also not betting him at that minus 172 mark. So the one we're going to take here for the live stream, if you can get minus 132 or better odds on this Billy Horschel head-to-head, this is the 2-ball against Zicheng Dao, I would be entering that in a heartbeat. And, I mean, we showed you the shots gained metrics from before, but if we zoom out to the last 50 rounds, I think this is really going to hammer this home. This is a massive sample size of over a year for both players. Billy Horschel is about a 0.5, almost a 0.6 shots gained better per round player than Zicheng Dao, and he's only minus 130 odds in that direction. So that's a piece of the exposure that I'll be trying to tail out there for Sunday. If he's minus 135, I might enter in a Hard Rock. That's going to be close to a 50-50 for me. But anything minus 130 or better is going to be a no-brainer bet. But for everything I'm playing for Sunday, guys, you guys can find that on my Patreon page. Link in the description to go out there and check it out. Not only every underdog and prize picks prop as I end up entering it, but also anything I'm entering on the sports books, like Hard Rock Bet, also better. We have sleeper props that I'm entering for golf as well. all over there on the Patreon page. The golf prop betting tier is how you guys get access to that. If you guys want the DFS sheet that we're showing on early on in this live stream, that's what the golf DFS tier is for. That's where you guys can download the spreadsheet with all my projections, my entire player pool, all of the player pool tags towards the right, all at your disposal for Sunday. But that's all I've got, guys. I appreciate your support in the channel as per usual. Let's go over any last second questions that you've got in the chat, and let's go ahead and finish this week strong. But other than that, smash that like button if you guys haven't already. Also subscribe to the channel if you haven't already as well, so you guys don't miss any of the content throughout the rest of the year. Looking at a Cantlay under 8.5 fairways. He's actually a half decent fairway percentage guy, so I'd much prefer somebody like Rasmus that is clearly below average in that category. In fact, at 8.5 fairways, you can make an argument towards his over because he's a half decent fairway percentage guy. And then you said thoughts on Scotty for the under birdie or better matchup against Smalley. So yeah, I did see that one before. I thought it was crazy that they had him at 1.5. But Sunday Scotty's a thing. He's one of the most clutch players in PGA Tour history. So I don't know if I could bite that. But 1.5 birdie or better matchup is as egregious as a projection's going to get. So if you took his under and you took the Alex Smalley side with the extra 1.5 birdies, I really couldn't blame you all that much. But I'm definitely not going to do it myself just because of what we've seen from Scotty on Sundays. And he's right there in position to win this event. And he said, you're looking at Hoagie at plus 4,500 for the outright. Where is he at, by the way? Like in terms of his leaderboard position? Let me just double check on that. I'll be able to give you a slightly better answer. At T6, 3 shots off the lead. So you're telling me he's got to win this 2 out of 100 times, right? To make that a profitable bet? Yeah. Starting 3 shots off the lead, is he going to win it at least 2 out of 100 times? Absolutely. Tom Hoagie is. So I have to see what I have on Hard Rock Bet. Maybe I can get that same number, if not better. But yeah, I need a Sunday sweat. I've got the Matt McCarty one up there in contention, but getting an extra sweat or two wouldn't be terrible either. But that's all I've got, guys. Hopefully you guys learned a little bit here during the live stream and you feel prepared for all of your Sunday exposure. That's all I've got, though. Smash that like button if you guys haven't already. Join the Patreon page for all the content for Sunday. And I'll see you guys for all the content next week.